Throughout history there were many different executions that were performed poorly or did not go as well as planned. The most botched execution in English history was probably the Duke of Monmouth, James Scott's execution, which was performed by a disheartened brute, Jack Ketch. Ketch was known for being a blundering axeman, and he took so many swings of the axe to kill James Scott that he almost incited a riot. Also in Edinburgh was the execution of Half Hanged MacNaghten, a woman who was sentenced to death for allegedly killing her child. She was then taken into the grass market in the shadow of Edinburgh Castle, where she was hanged in front of a huge crowd. But later on, after she was placed in a coffin, Maggie Dixon woke up, and she never faced the same fate, as it was deemed that she had been saved by God. But there was an execution in Ireland that took place that did not go as well as planned. Join us today as we look at the botched execution of Half Hanged MacNaghten, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. John MacNaghten was born in 1722 into an Anglo-Irish family that came to Ireland, and he attended school in County Donegal. In 1730 he inherited a sizable estate from his parents, which was worth around £500 a year, and he then went to the Trinity College in Dublin. He was well thought of, and then he married the sister-in-law of the first Earl of Musserine, and he became a rather flamboyant and popular figure in the local Dublin scene. He regularly partied and went to many different establishments where he would drink and gamble heavily. Because of this he gambled a huge amount of money away and squandered most of the wealth that he had previously inherited, and he even racked up large gambling debts and was threatened with arrest in 1750. But following his wife's death in childbirth, he then was given a job as a tax collector for Coleraine. However, this was not smart, as he was now handling huge amounts of money. He even gambled away £800 of the king's money, and he then lost his estate, and by 1760 he was a poor and homeless man. He tried to overcome his addiction, and he asked a friend, Andrew Knox, to help him. Knox was wealthy himself and was the MP for Donegal, and lived also on a large estate. Knox had a daughter named Mary Ann, who was around 15 at the time, and she was considered a very wealthy young lady, and had already inherited around £6,000, and she was seen as a very prosperous young lady. If her brother died, then she would have inherited further money, following the death of her father, and John MacNaghten became close with her, and he and Mary Ann developed a relationship, but it quickly turned rather strange. Mary Ann Knox took a shining to MacNaghten's looks and charms, and it's probable that the pair were thinking of marrying, and John's financial problems would then be sorted, as he would have inherited a very good dowry. John asked Mary's father for his daughter's hand in marriage, but Mr. Knox rejected the proposal on the basis that he viewed John as a gambling drunk. But John then asked that they would never mention the proposal again, and he felt very rejected. Later on, John tricked Mary Ann into a false marriage by having them act out the event outside of her estate, and Mary Ann said that only if my father gives his consent about the fake marriage, and John later claimed that the ceremony was in fact true. But her father was not aware of the sham marriage, and he allowed them to travel together to visit a friend. On the way they stopped at the town of Strabane, and word was then sent to Mary's father about the marriage. Mary was then taken back to her family's estate, and MacNaghten was told never to come back. Claims of the marriage appeared in local newspapers, and MacNaghten was eventually challenged to a duel by a friend of the Knox family, and was so drunk during this that he was shot in the leg. Mary's father was furious, and courts sided with the Knox family, voiding any possible marriage between the two. But to escape paying damages, MacNaghten fled to England and accumulated further gambling debts. But he then learned that Mary Ann was in County Cavan, and he returned to Ireland in disguise and was arrested for possession of gunpowder and was suspected of being a robber. But then he learned that Andrew Knox was due to attend the opening of Parliament in Dublin, and he and Mary departed Derry. John MacNaghten heard of their departure and was planning to stop the coach, and he gathered 4 men to help him before he attempted to abduct Mary Ann Knox. Andrew Knox saw MacNaghten and suspected an ambush, and he decided to take extra security because of this. The horse-drawn carriage pulled into the Clough Cour Inn for refreshments and pulled out again to continue. But a short distance from the inn, MacNaghten and his men stood armed with pistols in the road. They tried to subdue the Knoxes, and a servant was shot 3 times. Andrew Knox fired and his weapon failed, and then as MacNaghten saw the carriage, Anne threw herself in front of her father to protect him. A bullet from MacNaghten's pistol struck Mary Ann, and MacNaghten was also shot. but Mary was seriously injured, and 4 hours later she died from her wounds. But quickly a cavalry regiment rounded up John MacNaghten and his men, and he was imprisoned at Lifford Jail. He was awaiting trial for the murder of Mary Ann whilst in jail, but it's believed that other jails were not secure enough to hold MacNaghten. During the trial, John was able to get a lot of local support, and it was claimed he was a romantic criminal who wished to take his beloved from the arms of her overbearing father. This story captured the heart and imagination of the people everywhere in Ireland, but there was too much evidence elsewhere about John planning to kill and abduct. On the 7th of December 1761, John MacNaghten was found guilty of murdering Mary Ann Knox, and for this was sentenced to death by hanging. It was reported that no local man would build the scaffold to hang him on, as they supported him, so the Knox family had to create the scaffold to kill the man who murdered their heiress themselves. No blacksmith could be found to create the joints to hold the gallows in place, and the executioner had to travel from Cavan, as the local one would not perform the job. On the 15th of December at 1 p.m, he was taken from his jail to the site of his execution. The word of his execution had spread, and thousands of people had come to see the killing of the man, many deemed to have been a romantic victim. As he was led to the scaffold, the crowd waved white handkerchiefs showing their regret and support for him. As John MacNaghten stood on the gallows, he faced the crowd, and the noose was then placed around his neck. Shortly after this, the trapdoor opened, but it went horrifically wrong. As MacNaghten plummeted through the drop, the rope snapped under him, and he fell to his knees, and the crowd cried out. They screamed for him to be let go, and then tried to get MacNaghten to escape, and they wanted him to flee. This was a botched execution, and many believed that in fact he had been spared by God, and that the rope snapping was a signal of God's displeasure at the death sentence, and many claimed it was an act of divine intervention that saved him. But he stood defiantly at the crowd, and instead of running, he then faced up the gallows and cried out, "I will not live to be known as Half Hanged MacNaghten." With this he went back to the gallows, and the second attempt to kill him was successful, and he was left hanging. He is still known 250 years later as Half Hanged MacNaghten. Following his death, his body was buried behind Strabane Church, where he still rests to this day. Many people who witnessed his execution believed he was a champion who wished to confront the father of the woman he loved, but others saw him as a cold-blooded killer. His execution was botched and did not go as planned as it could have done, and when the rope snapped, many believed it was God's will to save his life. However, MacNaghten was a proud man who saw it as necessary to face the sentence that was placed upon him. It was likely that he would have been spared, as his death sentence was technically carried out even though it failed. The story of Half Hanged MacNaghten is a brilliant Irish tale of a criminal who defiantly met his end. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.